Commander Vreth-Okalon stood at the edge of the observation deck, his four eyes scanning the blue marble spinning lazily below him. He had waited his entire adult life for this moment. 50 years of training, 50 years of sacrifice, 50 years of eating protein rations that tasted like recycled boot leather, while generals back on Koravath Prime dined on roasted Zulbeast and told him the invasion would be soon. Well, soon had finally arrived. "Commander," said Lieutenant Pexis, his junior officer and the only being in the entire Koravathi fleet who could make the word commander sound both deeply respectful and mildly terrified at the same time. "All 17,000 ships are in formation. The fleet is ready." Vreth-Okalon turned slowly. He had practiced this turn in a mirror for 3 years. Slow, deliberate, the kind of turn that made soldiers feel like they were witnessing history. "Good," Vreth-Okalon said. That was it. Just good. He had also practiced that. One word. Powerful. Short. The kind of answer that great conquerors gave when underlings delivered great news. He had read every conquest memoir ever written by every Koravathi general who had ever crushed a lesser civilization. None of them had ever said, "Oh, wonderful, how exciting, I am so pleased." No. They said things like good, or proceed, or destroy them all. So he said good, and he felt excellent about it. The planet below was called Earth. The species living on it called themselves humans. The Koravathi Intelligence Bureau had been studying humans for exactly 53 years, 4 months, and 11 days. In that time, the Bureau had compiled 40,000 classified documents, 900 surveillance recordings, and one deeply confusing report about something called a hot dog eating competition that had caused 3 senior analysts to request psychological leave. Humans were, by any measurable standard, a primitive species. They had only recently achieved nuclear capability. Their space technology was laughable. Their military, while enthusiastic, was fragmented into hundreds of separate national armies that spent an impressive amount of time threatening each other rather than any actual outside threat. Their most advanced weapon was a missile that could travel 20 times the speed of sound. 20 times the speed of sound. Koravathi warships traveled at a fraction below the speed of light. Vreth-Okalon allowed himself a small smile. This was going to be the easiest conquest in the recorded history of galactic warfare. He was going to be famous. They were going to name solar systems after him. Schools. Perhaps a line of commemorative drinking vessels. "Begin the approach sequence," he said, "because that is also something great commanders said." The fleet began to move. Down on Earth, in a windowless room buried 12 stories beneath a very ordinary-looking government building, in a city that definitely did not exist on any public map, a woman named Captain Yara Nduom was eating a sandwich. It was not a good sandwich. The bread was slightly stale. The filling was some kind of processed meat that had stopped pretending to be a real animal somewhere around the 3rd round of manufacturing, and the mustard was the cheap kind that tasted aggressively of regret. But Yara was eating it anyway because she had been awake for 31 hours, and her body had stopped caring about flavor somewhere around hour 20. "Ma'am," said Specialist Tobias Funk, which was an unfortunate name that Tobias had spent his entire military career politely not discussing. "We have confirmed contact. 17,000 vessels. Low Earth orbit. They're not hiding." Yara put down her sandwich. "How long have they been there?" 6 minutes. "And they're not hiding." "No, ma'am. They are very much not hiding. They appear to have arranged themselves in a formation that our analysts are describing as, quote, aggressively theatrical." Yara looked at Tobias for a long moment. Then she looked at the main screen where a satellite feed was showing 17,000 alien spacecraft arranged in a perfect geometric pattern above the planet, like someone had spent a very long time on a very dramatic PowerPoint presentation. "Okay," Yara said. She picked up a phone. Not a cellular phone, not a digital encrypted communications device. An actual, physical, corded telephone connected to a system that had been built during the Cold War and had survived every attempt to modernize it because the people who maintained it had understood something very important. Nothing works better under pressure than something that has already survived a lot of pressure. She dialed 2 digits. The call connected in under a second. "This is Nduom," she said. "We have 17,000 guests. Initiate Protocol 17. There was a pause on the other end. Then a voice said, "Already." "Already," Yara confirmed. "Isa wannabe does homit." "Huh," said the voice. I thought we had more time. We did not have more time. Right, said the voice. Protocol 17, initiating now. Back on the Vreth-Okalon command ship, Vreth-Okalon was in the middle of preparing his broadcast. He had written his Conquest speech 6 years ago. He had revised it 42 times. He had practiced it in front of a mirror, in front of his officers, and once, memorably, in front of his elderly mother, who had told him it was very good and also asked whether he was eating enough. The speech was 15 minutes long, expertly paced, and contained exactly the right balance of menace, grandeur, and what his speechwriter had described as a touch of poetic inevitability. He had been waiting to deliver this speech for a very long time. Open a channel to the planet, he said. Channel open, Commander. Vreth-Okalon straightened. He pressed his uniform flat with both hands. He took one slow, measured breath. People of Earth, he began, his voice deep and resonant and carrying exactly the weight of history that he had practiced. You stand at the end of your age of independence. For 50 years the Vreth-Okalon Empire has observed your world. We have catalogued your wars. We have measured your ambitions. We have watched you stumble through your brief and noisy history like children playing at civilization. He paused. The pause was important. The pause said, I am not in a hurry, because I have already won. You will not be harmed if you surrender immediately. Your planet will be absorbed into the Vreth-Okalon Empire as a Tier 4 resource colony. Your people will serve as labor units. This is not a negotiation. This is not a discussion. This is the moment you realize that the universe is larger than you imagined, and you are very, very small within it. Another pause. Surrender now, and you will be remembered as the generation that accepted fate with dignity. Resist, and you will simply be remembered. He let the final word hang in the silence of space. It was a good speech. He was very proud of it. There was a brief silence from the planet below. Then the channel crackled, and a woman's voice came through. Calm. Almost bored. The voice of someone who had been awake too long and had eaten a bad sandwich and was not currently in the mood. Yeah, hi. This is Captain Yara Nduom, Earth Defense Command. We heard your speech. Very dramatic. Nice work on the pausing. I want you to know we genuinely appreciated the theatrical effort. Vreth-Okalon blinked. This was not the response his analysts had modeled. We are transmitting our surrender demands, he said carefully. Right, yes, we got those, said Yara. Here is the thing. We are not going to be surrendering today, or any day, but I do want to be polite about this, because I was raised correctly, so I am giving you exactly 30 seconds to turn your fleet around. A ripple of disbelief passed through the bridge of the Vreth-Okalon command ship. Officers exchanged glances. Pexis made a face that looked like he very much wanted to say something but had correctly decided that this was not the moment. Vreth-Okalon took a slow breath. You have 17 ground-based missile systems, he said. Your most powerful warhead yields approximately 15 megatons. I have 17,000 ships, each one shielded against a direct nuclear strike. I have spent 50 years preparing this fleet. You are going to turn down my offer of mercy because you have missiles. Oh goodness no, said Yara. We gave up on the missiles idea about 20 years ago. Way too slow. Way too obvious. We moved on. Moved on to what exactly? There was a small pause on Yara's end. Well, she said, that is a great question, and I will answer it in about 25 seconds. It had started, as most things on Earth started, with a problem. The problem was not specifically aliens. Earth had not known about aliens officially until 14 years ago when a Vreth-Okalon scout drone had malfunctioned over the Pacific Ocean and been recovered by a fishing trawler whose captain had immediately taken 47 photographs on his phone and posted them to a social media platform before any government agency could do anything about it. The photographs had gone viral within 4 hours. The governments of Earth had spent approximately 3 days trying to say it was a weather balloon before the entire planet collectively looked at the photographs, looked at the governments and said, that is not a weather balloon. After that, things had moved quickly. Not because humanity panicked. Not because society collapsed. Not because people stopped going to work or feeding their children or watching their favorite television programs. Humans, it turned out, were remarkably adaptable creatures who could absorb the confirmation of extraterrestrial life and still remember to water their houseplants. What happened was simpler. Quieter. More dangerous to any would-be conqueror than screaming and panic would ever have been. Humans got practical. A coalition of Earth's most capable engineers, physicists, and strategic minds had been pulled together under a program with a very boring name, the Global Coordination Initiative. The boring name was intentional. Boring names did not attract attention. Boring names did not get leaked to journalists. Boring names did not generate the kind of alarming headlines that caused public unrest. The GCI had one job: not to build bigger missiles, not to build faster planes. Those were old answers to old problems. Their job was to think about what an alien fleet would not expect. They had 14 years to think about it. 14 years of very clever, very motivated, very caffeinated human beings locked in rooms together, arguing, theorizing, building, failing, rebuilding, and arguing some more. 14 years of discarded ideas and brilliant accidents, and the specific kind of creative ferocity that happens when a species realizes that something much larger than itself is on its way, and it had better come up with something genuinely original. They had come up with something genuinely original. They had called it the Lattice, not because it was lattice-shaped. It was not. It was called the Lattice because the lead engineer, a quiet woman named Dr. Suki Adeyemi, had been eating a piece of lattice-topped pie when the central idea had arrived fully formed in her mind at 2 in the morning, and she had been so startled by the insight that she had knocked the pie off her desk and onto the floor. And the name had stuck because every great project deserves an absurd origin story. The Lattice was, in the most basic possible terms, a network of 47,000 relay stations distributed across every major landmass and ocean floor on Earth, connected to each other through a quantum-entangled communication system that operated at speeds that made the word instant feel slightly inadequate. The Lattice did not fire missiles. It did not launch warheads. It did not send soldiers or ships or drones. What the Lattice did was considerably simpler and considerably more devastating, and had taken 14 years and the combined genius of approximately 8,000 human beings to achieve. It generated a field, a very specific kind of electromagnetic field, one that Dr. Adeyemi's team had spent 9 years refining down to a precision that could target any object within a defined orbital band above Earth's surface, calculate its exact position with an error margin of less than 3 centimeters, and then do something very particular to the atomic structure of any inorganic manufactured material within that field's range. What it did, specifically, was cause the molecular bonds in any complex engineered alloy to undergo spontaneous lattice decoherence. In practical terms, this meant that anything the field touched that had been built by an intelligence other than Earth's own would, within approximately 3 seconds of exposure, quietly and thoroughly fall apart at a subatomic level. Not explode, not burn, not dramatically shatter, just fall apart. Silently, completely, irreversibly, like watching someone take the universe's most powerful eraser and simply remove something from existence. They had tested it on decommissioned satellites. The satellites had not exploded, had not flashed, had produced no sound, no light, no drama of any kind. One moment they existed, the next moment they did not. Yara had been present for the third test. She had watched a 7-ton steel and titanium platform disappear in the time it took her to blink. She had then gone and sat very quietly in a stairwell for about 20 minutes, thinking about what it meant to be a member of a species that could do that. The 30 seconds were almost up. On the Koruvathi command ship, Vreth-Okalon was beginning to feel the first faint stirrings of something he could not quite name, something that lived in the space between confidence and doubt, something quiet and cold that whispered to the back of his mind that the woman on the other end of the channel was too calm. Conquerors had invaded hundreds of worlds. Vreth-Okalon had read about all of them. He had studied the responses of lesser civilizations. They panicked, they begged, they screamed, they threatened in voices that broke under the weight of their own terror. They fired useless weapons and made dramatic last stands that accomplished nothing except providing excellent footage for the Imperial Victory Archives. They did not sound bored. They did not make jokes about his pausing. They did not give him 30 seconds to leave as though they were a landlord and he was a particularly untidy tenant. Pexis, Vreth-Okalon said quietly. Commander, what does your threat analysis show? Pexis looked at his console. His expression did a complicated series of things. No incoming missiles, Commander. No ship launches. No detectable energy buildup, no radar lock, no communications to any off-world source. Nothing on any sensor we have. Nothing, sir. Vreth-Okalon looked back at the view screen showing the blue planet below. It looked exactly as it always had. Peaceful, small, blue and white and green and entirely, irritatingly serene. The channel crackled. 30 seconds, said Yara's voice. There was a pause. Activating the lattice now, she said. Sorry about this, genuinely. And then, nothing happened. For 1 full second, nothing happened at all. And then on every single sensor screen across every single bridge of every single one of the 17,000 Koruvathi warships that had spent 50 years being built and outfitted and armed and crewed and polished and prepared for the single greatest military conquest in the history of the Koruvathi Empire, every single reading simultaneously dropped to 0. Not because the sensors were destroyed, because the ships were gone. Not all at once, quite. It took 10 seconds in total. 10 seconds for the lattice field to propagate fully through the orbital band, touching every vessel, large and small, from the command ship down to the last resupply drone anchored at the edge of the formation. 10 seconds, 17,000 ships, 50 years of preparation, gone. Not in fire, not in explosions, no dramatic last transmissions or valiant final stands or cascading reactor failures lighting up the night sky. No sound, no light, just a field, moving outward from Earth like a slow, gentle exhale, and then empty space. The only thing left was one single escape pod, one small, spherical, 2-person emergency vessel that had been manufactured not by Koruvathi Industry but by a small subsidiary company on a neutral trade world called Mevaris Station, using raw materials from 3 different non-Koruvathi suppliers, assembled by workers who were not Koruvathi citizens. It was technically not Koruvathi made. The lattice did not touch it. Inside the pod, floating in 0 gravity and staring at the space where 17,000 ships had been 2 minutes ago, were Commander Vreth-Okalon and Lieutenant Pexis. Pexis was making a sound that no language had quite the right word for. It was somewhere between a gasp and a sob, and the kind of noise a person makes when their entire understanding of how the universe works has just been efficiently revised. Vreth-Okalon was not making any sound at all. He was simply staring out the small oval window at the empty, silent, utterly unbothered stars. The channel crackled one more time. "Commander," said Yara's voice, still calm, still carrying the faint texture of someone who had not slept enough and had eaten a deeply mediocre sandwich. "We are transmitting coordinates for a landing site in the North Atlantic. Please proceed there and we can discuss the terms of your surrender. We have food. It is better than whatever you have been eating, I promise." A pause. "Also," she added, "please bring identification, standard processing procedure, nothing personal." The channel closed. In the empty pod, drifting above the small blue planet, Vreth-Okalon slowly turned to look at Pexis. Pexis looked back at him. "Commander," Pexis said very quietly, "I think I need to file a report." "Yes," said Vreth-Okalon. He said nothing else for a very long time. Because sometimes there are no words. There are simply moments when the universe reaches out and taps you firmly on the shoulder and says, very politely, that you have made a significant error in your assumptions, and all the conquest speeches and mirror practice and protein rations and 50 years of preparation in the world will not change the fact that somewhere down on that small, blue, infuriatingly calm planet, a woman who had not slept enough was now going back to finish her sandwich. And the stars said nothing, as stars always do. And the earth turned, as it always had. And somewhere 12 stories underground, Yara Nduom picked up the second half of her sandwich, took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and said to no one in particular, "Still terrible." The holding facility that Earth Defense Command had prepared for potential alien visitors was, and there is truly no diplomatic way to say this, a repurposed conference center, not a military base, not a high-security underground bunker carved into the bones of a mountain, not a gleaming technological marvel with sliding blast doors and armed guards in powered armor standing at every corner. A conference center, specifically the kind of conference center that had, until 14 months ago, hosted regional accounting seminars and the occasional motivational speaking event. It still had the motivational posters on the walls. One of them said, "Reach higher," above a photograph of a person climbing a mountain. Another one said, "Teamwork makes the dream work," in large, friendly letters above a photograph of people in business casual clothing smiling at a whiteboard. When Commander Vreth-Okalon was escorted through the main entrance by 2 human guards who were armed but not, notably, pointing anything at him, the first thing he saw was the "Teamwork makes the dream work" poster. He stared at it for a long time. "This way, sir," said one of the guards. His name tag said Corporal Demi Achebe, and he had the specific energy of someone who had been given a genuinely strange assignment and had decided, professionally, to treat it as entirely normal. Vreth-Okalon walked. Pexis walked behind him. Pexis had not stopped looking at everything with the wide, slightly unhinged expression of someone attending a surprise party that had replaced their entire understanding of reality. He stared at the carpeted floors, at the drop ceiling, at the vending machine in the corner of the lobby that dispensed something called a Choco Crunch Bar for 1 unit of local currency. He stared at the humans moving through the hallway with clipboards and coffee cups, and the general air of people who had a lot to do and not quite enough time to do it. None of them stared back. A few glanced over. One woman walking past said "morning" without breaking stride, in the tone of someone who had been told there would be aliens today and had filed that information alongside her other Wednesday tasks. "They are not afraid of us," Pexis whispered to Vreth-Okalon. "No," said Vreth-Okalon. "Should they not be afraid of us?" "They were presumably afraid of the fleet," said Vreth-Okalon. "The fleet is no longer present." Pexis considered this. "Right," he said. "Right. They were brought to a room that had a rectangular table, 8 chairs, a jug of water, and 2 plates of food that neither of them recognized. There was also a small printed card that said the food had been nutritionally analyzed against Koruvathi biological data from their own database, recovered from the scout drone incident 14 years ago, and confirmed to be safe for consumption. Vreth-Okalon picked up the card and read it twice. They had analyzed his species biology from a drone that had crashed 14 years ago, and prepared a compatible meal. He set the card down. He sat. Yara arrived 11 minutes later. She walked in carrying a cup of coffee, a tablet, and the general demeanor of someone who had finally slept for 6 hours and felt marginally better about existence. She sat down across from Vreth-Okalon, put her coffee on the table, looked at him directly and said, "Commander, how are you holding up?" Vreth-Okalon looked at her for a moment. "You destroyed my fleet," he said. "We did," said Yara. "I apologize for that, genuinely. It was not our preferred outcome. Our preferred outcome was that you turned around. You gave me 30 seconds. We gave you 30 seconds and a warning," Yara said. "That is 30 seconds and a warning more than you gave us. You flew 17,000 warships into our orbit and told us we would be a labor colony. We thought the 30 seconds was frankly generous." Vreth-Okalon opened his mouth, then he closed it, because she was by any measurable standard correct. He looked at her. She looked at him. Between them the jug of water sat, not contributing to the conversation but being very present about it. "How?" he said finally. Not a full question, just the word. The beginning and the end of everything he needed to know. Yara set down her coffee. She folded her hands on the table. "We had 14 years, she said. "After your drone went down, we knew someone was watching. We knew eventually someone would come. So we stopped spending our time on the things we knew you would expect, and started spending our time on the things you would not." "The field," said Vreth-Okalon. "The field," Yara confirmed. It unmade our ships. It encouraged your ship's molecular structure to reconsider its commitments," said Yara. The result was, yes, effectively the same. Pexis, who had been sitting very quietly in the corner chair eating something from the plate that he had correctly identified as edible and had decided, on the basis that he had not eaten in 16 hours, to try anyway, looked up and said, "How wide is the effective range?" Yara looked at him. "Wide," she said. "How wide is wide?" "Wide enough that this conversation is not one I am going to continue in this direction," said Yara pleasantly. Pexis looked back down at his food. The formal debriefing took 4 hours. In those 4 hours, Vreth-Okalon answered questions and Yara asked them, and 3 other humans sat at the table with tablets and said very little but typed a great deal. The questions were thorough. They covered the structure of the Koruvathi Empire, the number of active fleets, the location of the nearest command post, the communication protocols, the chain of authority, the timeline by which the Empire would expect confirmation of conquest before dispatching a second fleet. That last answer had made all three of the typing humans type very fast for a long time. When will they send another fleet? Yara asked. When they do not receive confirmation of successful conquest within 90 days, said Vreth-Okalon. A second fleet will be dispatched, larger, more heavily armed. How much larger? Vreth-Okalon looked at her steadily. 100,000 ships. The room was quiet for a moment. Well, said Yara. She picked up her coffee. She took a slow sip. She set it down. Good thing we have 89 days to prepare, she said. Vreth-Okalon stared at her. You do not understand. 100,000 warships, each one larger than the command vessel you just unmade, armed with weapons that do not rely on alloys your field can decohere. They will have read the after-action reports. They will know what happened here. They will adapt. So will we, said Yara. You are one planet. We are one very motivated planet, said Yara. You would be surprised what that turns out to mean. The thing about humans, Vreth-Okalon was beginning to understand, was that they were not impressive in the way that empires expected impressive things to be impressive. The Kuruvati Empire had a long and thoroughly documented list of qualities it looked for when assessing a species as a potential threat. Scale of military force, technological sophistication, energy output, fleet capacity, resource base. These were the metrics by which galactic power was measured, and by every single one of those metrics, Earth was irrelevant. Small population, primitive spacefaring, one solar system, no fleet, no allies, no reach beyond their own moon. On paper, Earth was not a threat. On paper, Earth was barely a footnote. But the thing about paper was that it could only hold what someone had thought to write down. And no one had thought to write down certain things about humans because no one had thought those things were worth measuring. Things like how quickly they learned from failure. Things like what they did when they were cornered. Things like the specific and somewhat unnerving quality of their imagination when they were given a problem they could not solve with conventional tools and told that they had a fixed amount of time before something very large arrived to end their existence. Vreth-Okalon spent his third day at the conference center being given a tour, not of a military facility, not of a weapons program, just as Corporal Ashebe had explained with a perfectly straight face, a general orientation. The orientation included a visit to one of the Lattice relay stations, which from the outside looked like a power substation, the kind of dull grey industrial box that existed on roadsides all over human civilization, and which no one ever looked at twice. Inside was something that had required Vreth-Okalon to sit down after seeing it, not from fear, but from the very specific vertigo of realizing that 47,000 of these boxes were distributed across the entire surface of this planet and beneath its oceans, all of them connected, all of them waiting, all of them capable of being activated in under 4 seconds. 47,000 relay stations, built in 11 years, by one species, on one planet, while also continuing to run their economies and maintain their various national governments and produce enormous quantities of entertainment media and argue about politics and hold sporting competitions and do every other thing that humans apparently did as a matter of ordinary daily life, apparently undistracted by the background knowledge that an alien empire had been watching them from space for over a decade. How? Vreth-Okalon said, standing in the relay station, looking at the equipment. Corporal Ashebe considered the question. We had a deadline, he said simply. That was it. That was the entire answer. We had a deadline. Vreth-Okalon thought about the 50 years of preparation his own empire had put into the Conquest fleet, the planning committees, the 5-year projections, the budget debates, the generals arguing over formation strategies in conference rooms while junior officers like himself ate protein rations and waited and waited and waited. 50 years, and these creatures had built something more devastating in 11, because they had a deadline. On day 5, Yara came to find Vreth-Okalon in the small room he had been assigned. It had a bed, a window that looked out onto a parking lot, and the motivational poster that said "Reach Higher" had been moved from the lobby and placed on the wall, apparently by someone with a sense of humor that Vreth-Okalon was choosing not to engage with. Yara sat down in the chair by the window. She did not have her coffee this time, which meant Vreth-Okalon had started to learn that she was not in formal mode. This was not a debrief. I have a proposal, she said. Vreth-Okalon waited. You know your empire. You know how they think. You know what the Second Fleet will carry, what systems they will use, what adaptations they will make after they analyze the loss of your fleet. She paused. I want your help. Vreth-Okalon was quiet for a moment. You want the commander of the fleet you destroyed to help you defeat the next fleet, he said. Yes, that is, he said slowly, an extraordinary amount of confidence. It is a practical request, said Yara. You have information we need. We have 84 days left. We are not going to spend any of them being sentimental about it. Vreth-Okalon looked at her for a long time. Outside the window, a human in a reflective vest was slowly pushing a cart across the parking lot, doing something with the light fixtures at the edge of the lot. Just maintenance. Ordinary, daily, entirely mundane human maintenance of an ordinary parking lot outside a conference center where an alien commander was sitting and being asked to commit treason against his empire. What do I receive? He said, in exchange. Asylum, said Yara. Permanent residency, safety for yourself and your lieutenant, and, if the Second Fleet is defeated, we open a formal diplomatic channel to whichever faction of your empire is willing to talk instead of invade. Vreth-Okalon looked back at her. You think there are factions? There are always factions, said Yara. Your empire has existed for over 300 years. 300 years is long enough to grow factions. We looked at your political structure in the data your drone was carrying. There are at least 4 distinct bloc groupings in your Senate that have historically pushed for trade expansion over military expansion. Vreth-Okalon stared at her. She had analyzed the drone data. All of it, for 14 years. He thought of the 40,000 classified documents the Intelligence Bureau had compiled on humans. He thought of the 900 surveillance recordings. He thought of the 3 analysts who had requested psychological leave after the hot dog eating competition report. He thought of all of it. And he thought of how certain his empire had been that they understood what they were dealing with. And he almost laughed. You have been preparing for the diplomatic conversation, he said slowly. Not just the military one. We have been preparing for every conversation, said Yara. We would very much prefer the diplomatic one. War is expensive and we have a lot of things we would rather be doing. A silence settled over the room. Outside, the maintenance worker finished what they were doing and pushed their cart away. The parking lot returned to being an ordinary parking lot. The Reach Higher poster said nothing because it was a poster. Vreth-Okalon thought about the protein rations, about 50 years of waiting, about a speech he had practiced in a mirror for 3 years, delivered to a woman who had responded to it while eating a sandwich. He thought about what the Second Fleet would do to this planet if it arrived and found Earth undefended. He thought about the 4 Senate blocs who preferred trade to conquest. He had met some of their representatives. He had eaten dinner with 2 of them at a function 7 years ago. They were not bad people. They were people who had been consistently outvoted by people with bigger ships and louder voices. I have one condition, he said. Yara raised an eyebrow. When the diplomatic channel opens, said Vreth-Okalon, I want to be in the room. Yara looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded. Done, she said. The 84 days were not quiet days. Inside the conference center, and in 17 facilities connected to it by encrypted lines, Vreth-Okalon talked. He talked about fleet formations and shielding frequencies, and the specific alloys used in the second-generation warships that differed structurally from the first. He talked about communication protocols and blind spots in sensor arrays, and the specific tactical doctrines the Second Fleet's admirals were most likely to follow. He talked, and humans listened, and humans typed, and humans took what he said and fed it into rooms full of other humans who took the information and turned it into things. Adjustments to the lattice, new configurations, new targeting parameters, new field frequencies tuned specifically to the molecular structure of second-generation Koruvathi alloys. Pexis, who turned out to have an exceptionally detailed memory for technical specifications that his file had described as obsessive but occasionally useful, spent most of those 84 days in a room with Dr. Suki Adeyemi, the engineer who had named the lattice after a pie she had dropped on the floor. They worked 18-hour days. Pexis ate more of the Choco Crunch bars from the vending machine than any being had ever eaten before, and developed what could only be described as a preference for them that he discussed with more enthusiasm than the situation warranted. On day 71, he solved a targeting calibration problem that had taken Adeyemi's team 3 years to partially address, in about 40 minutes, using a mathematical framework from Koruvathi navigation theory that had never been applied to anything like the Lattice before. Ademi had stared at his work for a long time. Then she had said, "Huh." Then she had called 6 other engineers into the room. Then they had all stared at it. Then someone had quietly gone to the vending machine and come back with a Choco Crunch bar and handed it to Pexis without a word, which Pexis had interpreted, correctly, as the highest form of professional compliment available in the current setting. The second fleet arrived on day 89, 1 day earlier than projected. 104,000 ships. Larger, differently configured, carrying weapons that did not rely on the standard alloys, coming in fast and spread wide, not in the theatrical geometric formation of the First Fleet, but in a dispersed tactical pattern that was clearly designed to make a single-point field activation less effective. They had adapted. They had read the after-action reports. They had done exactly what Vreth-Okalon had said they would do. On the floor of the Lattice command room, which was a repurposed ballroom in the same conference center because apparently the aesthetic commitment to the location was total, Yara stood at the main console. Vreth-Okalon stood beside her, which was strange, and Pexis stood beside him, which was also strange, but the last 84 days had recalibrated everyone's definition of strange to a degree that made almost nothing register as unusual anymore. "Dispersed formation," said Tobias Funk from his station, still professionally not mentioning his own name. "They are trying to spread beyond a single field radius. They are outside the original Lattice range," confirmed another technician. "Activate the updated configuration," said Yara. "The configuration that Pexis had contributed to. The one with the expanded targeting radius and the recalibrated frequency set. The one that covered an orbital band 2.5 times wider than the original." "Activating," said the technician. The field propagated. It took 14 seconds this time. 14 seconds for 104,000 ships. The screens showed the same thing the screens had shown 89 days ago. Empty space. Clean. Silent. Absolute. The room was quiet for a moment. Then someone began to clap. Then someone else, then the whole room, because humans, it turned out, applauded things, even when standing in a repurposed ballroom at 5 in the morning, even when exhausted, even when still slightly terrified of what came next, because acknowledging a victory before moving to the next problem was something they had decided, collectively and across every culture on the planet, was worth doing. Vreth-Okalon stood in the middle of the applause and felt something he had not expected to feel. Relief, not for his own survival, not even, entirely, for the planet below which he had spent 89 days helping to defend, but for the 4 Senate blocks back home who preferred trade to conquest, because 2 lost fleets, 221,000 ships gone without a single confirmed casualty on the Earth side, was a data point that even the loudest pro-conquest general would struggle to argue past. The Empire was going to have to listen to the trade bloc now. "Transmitting the diplomatic package," said Tobias. Yara had prepared a transmission, addressed to the Koravathi Senate, specifically addressed to the 4 blocks who had historically pushed for expansion through trade. It included the full technical data on the Lattice, every detail, freely given, along with a very simple, very clear message. "We exist. We are capable. We would prefer to be neighbors rather than enemies. We have things you want. You have things we want. There is a better version of this story available, if your Senate would like to write it. We are sending you our proposed terms. We are also sending you the contact information of Commander Vreth-Okalon, who will be representing Earth in any follow-up discussion, because he has eaten our food and survived our parking lot, and we trust him, and we hope you will too." Below the formal text, in a smaller font that may or may not have been added by someone with a sense of humor, was a single additional line. "Also, we have a snack called a Choco Crunch Bar that we believe your species will enjoy. Sample package attached." Pexis, who had been quietly reading the transmission over Tobias's shoulder, made a sound that was approximately a laugh. Then he stopped pretending it was not a laugh and just laughed. After a moment, Vreth-Okalon laughed too. It was not a large laugh. It was the small, exhausted, helpless kind of laugh that arrives after a very long time of not laughing, and it felt strange in his chest, but not unpleasant. Yara looked at both of them. Then she went and got her coffee. "We will hear back within 30 days, she said. "Until then, gentlemen, I suggest you both get some rest." She took a sip of her coffee. "And Pexis," she added, not turning around, "please stop buying all the Choco Crunch bars. Other people work here. Pexis looked at the 3 Choco Crunch bars he was currently holding. I will buy 2 fewer, he said. Yara did not respond to this. Outside the conference center, the sun was coming up over an ordinary parking lot in an ordinary country on a small planet that had just defeated the second largest fleet in Korovathi Imperial history using a repurposed conference center, the world's most devastating subatomic field, and the institutional knowledge of the commander who had led the invasion. The Reach Higher poster caught the first light through the lobby windows. Nobody was looking at it. They had work to do. And somewhere in the vast quiet between stars, a diplomatic transmission was traveling at the speed of light toward a Senate that was going to have a very interesting morning. The universe, it turned out, was not a place where size guaranteed victory. It was a place where the species that got creative when cornered, that stayed calm when threatened, that turned enemies into allies and deadlines into revolutions and a crashed drone into 14 years of the most productive paranoia in recorded history, those species did not merely survive. They thrived. And they did it all while eating terrible sandwiches.